So, I made an indie action platformer game inspired by Halo and Half-Life. I know, the title already told you that, but I wanted to reiterate it here. Although I want to be clear, I didn't make it alone. I built this game along with my brother, who was instrumental in the success of this project, writing and performing all the music and writing 99% of the code. So, credit where credit is due.
After all, credit's where credit is due.
But before we talk too much about it, let's get some essential background information out there for you. Ever since I was 12 years old, I've been using a simple coding program aimed at younger users, known as Scratch. This program allows users with little to no real computer coding knowledge to create basic games and programs. Perhaps you're familiar with Scratch, and if so, you know that it has a reputation for being used to make boring, non-playthrough worthy games. Most games on the Scratch website are platformers, where the player is a simple shape with similar uninspired movement physics, going from static level to static level, avoiding the color red and spike-shaped objects. Now, this is all well and good for little kids learning the extreme basics of computer programming, but over time I wanted to learn what the limits were to which I could push Scratch, seeing just how good of a game it could make. I made quite a few games that we won't get into today, and more recently produced a 2D action platformer with combat inspired by Halo, called Project Infested. Now, this is not the main game we'll be talking about today, but it is the predecessor of that game. In Project Infested, the player has simple movement and aiming controls which are standard to first-person shooter games, moving with the WASD keys and aiming and firing with the mouse. This combination of movement and aiming works surprisingly well in a 2D environment, and I'm surprised that you don't see it in more professional games. Most platformer shooter games employ an aiming system similar to the old Metroid games, where the player aims directly left or right and can hold down a button to aim diagonally up or down. The free aim we made for Project Infested allows for far more precise and tight gameplay, with more active and engaging enemies to fight. But that's getting ahead of ourselves, we'll get into that more later. In Project Infested, you have access to 4 weapons and fight a couple of different enemy types while platforming swiftly through each level. This game pushed my limits of understanding with the Scratch program, and did some things I've never seen any other game developers do with the software. But as advanced as it was compared to my previous work, it was nothing compared to the sequel. Now we finally get to the main topic. The second game in the Infested series, called Planet Infested. By the way, spoiler warning for the first game in case you want to play it, and you can check out the link in the comments for that. You take the role of a super cool action hero bounty hunter. But no, not that one. No, not that one either. Come on, this guy is my own original character. Anyway, our bounty hunter is hired by the Earth government to investigate a research station that was taken over by a parasitic life form. Oh, and before you say it, I have been told this game is very reminiscent of Dead Space, but I've never played Dead Space and I barely even know what it's about, so that's actually just a coincidence. Anyway, the player discovers that the parasite was a bioweapon designed by the Earth government for covert use against not only their enemies, but any innocent human colonists who separated from the government. Of course, this bioweapon violates interstellar treaties, so the bounty hunter threatens to expose the whole project to the public. This betrayal angers his contact from the Earth government, who in turn betrays him back, remotely enabling the station's internal defense grid and setting it to target the player. In response to this, the bounty hunter blows up the main reactor, causing the station to fall from orbit to the uninhabited planet below, which consequently destroys both it and the entire infestation. But the government had a contingency plan in case their hired agent went rogue, and a mercenary starship exits subspace, firing at the player's fleeing spacecraft, which causes him to crash land upon the very planet the infested station had been orbiting. The bounty hunter, barely surviving the crash, makes the discovery that this entire planet has been overrun by the bioweapon, clearly as some sort of testing ground for the terrible plague. Now, stranded on the desolate planet, surrounded by infected plant life and followed by mercenaries intent on finishing their job, the player must find a way to survive and escape, or knowledge of this grim pestilence which may be used against others dies with him. The combat in this game is heavily inspired by Halo. The player has 3 offensive strategies at any time: his gun, melee, and grenades. This type of gunplay was dubbed by the developers of Halo as the Golden Triangle of Combat. a system which allows players a sandbox of tools to decide to use at any time based upon the scenario that they're in. The melee is slow, and of course has limited range, but it does a lot of damage to close-by enemies. The grenades are a basic handheld explosive device, where after a delayed fuse they will explode, hurting every enemy caught within the blast radius. The player's main weapons are organized as a set of 3 weapon attachments, each of which makes a meaningful difference in combat when it's chosen for use. The game starts you out with the submachine gun, which is not very accurate, but makes up for it in the sheer number of projectiles fired. The submachine gun is an ideal weapon to start the player off with, as the wide spread allows the player to hit targets without aim being as important, and it may take a new player a while to get the hang of aiming well in a game with which they have little experience. The submachine gun also excels at stun locking enemies in place. By concentrating fire, the player can render an enemy immobile for a time, allowing him more time to make decisions and react to other enemies. A concept I learned playing Halo is that it's rewarding and satisfying to use weapons that cause enemies to have clear and evident visual reactions. That's something that we tried to build into our game. The rifle is the next weapon the player will come upon. As you may expect, it is far more accurate and packs more punch per shot, but pays for this by firing slower. The rifle functions as the main precision weapon of the game's sandbox, and it's necessary to have one. Sometimes trick shots can be accomplished with the rifle which no other gun in the game is accurate enough for, like shooting through this tiny passage. There are also enemy gun emplacements with energy shields, which can be effectively hit in the notch of their shield by the rifle's tight precision. Finally, the player will gain access to the shotgun, a bulky, powerful weapon attachment which hits seriously hard at close range, but can only be fired twice in quick succession before overheating. Think of the beam rifle from Halo 2.
Inbound Phantoms, Chief.
If you space out your shots, however, you can fire continuously without ever overheating the weapon. Also, now seems like a good time to mention my brother made the weapon sounds, and they sound phenomenal. Just listen to these clips. Speaking of sound design work, my brother also has a video of the full soundtrack uploaded to his channel. If you want to hear the great music he made for the game, go check it out. The link will be in the pinned comment. But any combat-focused action game needs a good cast of enemies to fight. Let's talk about the enemies we made for Planet Infested, and the special abilities each one has to make it a unique challenge on the battlefield. The player will face 6 unique enemy types overall, which are part of 2 separate factions trying to stop us from completing the mission: the Mercenary faction and the Bioweapon Growths. The Mercenaries built a fighting force of strong, yet unintelligent alien species, using them as a personal army to fight their enemies. They were able to accomplish this by fitting them with neural command and control systems, which allow a human user at a distance to control the actions of the alien, using it essentially as a fighting drone. The first alien enemy the player encounters is of small stature, but with a strong exoskeletal shell. These creatures are known as the Svatar in the game's lore, and they function as a sort of grunt infantry trooper for the mercenary army. Wielding a cheaply made, relatively low-powered directed energy pistol, they don't pose much of a threat to our skilled bounty hunter protagonist. However, as a defense mechanism, they will tuck into their tough shells and roll away to escape if they are dealt enough damage, adding a special cadence to combat with them. Next, we will encounter a stronger and more aggressive enemy variant, known in the game's lore as the Keafa. This abnormally strong species wields a directed energy carbine which can fire repeatedly at the player, and if you risk approaching it too closely, will also attempt to deal a heavy melee blow with the butt of its weapon. While tough, these opponents can be stunned in place when submachine gun fire is concentrated on them, which gives the player an opportunity to keep them from firing back. The final enemy from the Mercenary faction is the Emplaced Disruptor Turret, a shielded defense turret programmed to automatically target hostile units and eliminate them. The energy shield on the front of the turret effectively stops any and all bullets that impact it, but the opening in between the 2 shield panels allows for accurate weapons like the rifle to slip by, rewarding pinpoint shooting on the player's part with a satisfying explosion animation. That's not the only strategy to take down the turrets though, as a well-placed grenade blows them apart quite reliably. Again, Halo's inspiration can be seen here. Having enemies with meaningful differences in gameplay makes for a far more interesting and engaging combat experience. In Halo, the Covenant ranks all fight very differently, and each have unique abilities and weaknesses, making the player's choices made in combating them more rewarding. The other faction the player will encounter in gameplay is made up of mutated plant growths caused by the bioweapon. Let's talk about it a bit, actually. In the game's lore, it is a disease spread through plants which alters their genetic structure, designed not only to devastate the ecology of entire planets, but render whatever plant life remains vicious and deadly, effectively turning the planet into an uninhabitable biohazard zone. While the mercenary faction fights tactically with a slow, measured approach, the mutated growths will relentlessly throw themselves at the player, attempting to overwhelm him with sheer numbers. Starting off simply, there are immobile growths, which only exist to produce pollen and seed which can continue the infectious process on other plant life. While they can't move around, these living disease production facilities secrete poisonous toxins onto the razor-sharp thorns with which they are covered, posing a grave threat in spite of complete immobility. The player will also encounter a small mutation capable of non-stationary combat. These crawl out of dark corners and cracks in the walls to jump at the player with all the mindless rage of a killer hornet, though 10 times the size. While using the impulse boost, the player is immune to melee damage, so with practice these enemies are a much lower threat than they are when you first encounter them. Even so, you must be ready, as in some areas they swarm together in much larger groups. Next, we have a full-grown version of the infected combat growths, and these enemies pack quite the punch. They can adjust their movement speed to match the player's momentum, making them far harder to dodge. When they're ready to attack, they lunge with a devastating downward blow, crushing anything caught underneath. The player can boost straight towards them and bait them into a melee attack, which allows him to get behind the creature and fire at its back. This combat dance keeps the gameplay engaging with these enemy types. Lastly, we have a combat growth which prefers to fight from a range. This enemy can roll around inside of a hardened shell, which protects it from almost all damage. Once it reaches sufficient distance from the player, it will open up and begin throwing tiny, power-sapping leech growths that will latch onto the player and then absorb power directly from his shield system. These tiny suckers cannot be damaged with conventional weapons, but will be shaken off with a blast of the player's impulse boost. As to the growth that spawns them, it must be hit on the soft inner surface beneath the shell to do real damage. But there are also other ways to destroy it. With the unique tactics each of these enemies employ, each level can throw new and special challenges at the player by mixing and matching enemy types that spawn, keeping the gameplay fresh and engaging. However, even then, this is a relatively small enemy roster. Sadly, the Scratch program simply does not have the capability necessary to make a commercially viable game of full size, similar to the likes of other 2D platformers like the Metroid series or Hollow Knight and others. Our game has just 12 levels and takes only about an hour to complete. But the satisfying gameplay and fair challenge therein is truly 1 in a million for games on Scratch. Now, remember when I said this game was also inspired by Half-Life? Well, we don't have any crowbars in our game. But now we can get into the game's story and lore, and you'll see where I took inspiration from that series. Again, spoiler warning. If you want to play the game and experience the story firsthand, go play it at the link in the comments. Okay, here we go. The game opens with the protagonist unconscious from the crash of his ship. Hey, no, wrong clip. There, that's better. He begins to have some traumatic flashbacks, but soon the emergency medical aid from his suit kicks him back to reality. The first levels consist of exploring the planet, hoping to find a way to escape intact before the mercenaries find him, or the infestation overwhelms him. As any fan of the Half-Life game series would know, Valve did an excellent job of doing visual storytelling in their games. Visual storytelling is a method of soft lore exposition, where objects and details within the world hint at what has happened here before. This is far superior to the method of lazily exposition dumping lore in the player's face. From the green ooze in the introductory tram ride showing us that safety precautions are not very important at the Black Mesa Research Facility, to the shackles worn by the Vortigons throughout the campaign, hinting that they are being controlled by outside influences. Half-Life does a great job intriguing the player with purposely designed details that tell a story. There are, of course, countless more details from Half-Life that I could go over, but that could use its own video someday. Inspired by the care taken by Valve to craft a real and detailed world for their story to take place within, I tried to work in some visual storytelling wherever I could in these first levels. Unfortunately, I couldn't fit in nearly as much as I would have wanted, but let's go over what did make it. During the first few levels, we can see that the atmosphere of the planet is colored thickly by the disgusting pollen released by the infected plant life. There is also a clear lack of any healthy, uninfected plant life, rendering the surface of the planet just barren rock with piles of disgusting, fetid organic matter littered about. The player journeys through a rocky canyon, facing many dangerous opponents. If this small section of the whole world is this bad after being hit by the bioweapon, the amount of hostile entities in total across the entire planetary surface is staggering to imagine. This bioweapon is truly devastating to a horrifying degree. Later on, the player enters a facility built by the scientists who were conducting the tests. Inside, there are signs of neglect, metallic panels blackened by explosions, smashed consoles, walls torn up and removed entirely. A lower level of the facility is in complete chaos, utterly torn apart as though it had been through a war. Clearly, this place has been overrun for a long time and is worse for the wear. Within these damaged structures, the player can find consoles hidden around that activate some remaining functional doors and gravity lifts, which become necessary for traversal, a detail which fleshes out the environmental design and makes the world feel a bit more lived in and real. These gravity lifts would have been used to move heavy cargo around back when the station was in working order. But now they're malfunctioning, giving a far more potent punt of physical motion than they were originally designed for. Sadly, with the limits of Scratch as a game engine being pushed almost as far as we could here, we didn't have room for more interactive level details. For more visual and environmental storytelling, I wanted to make functional parts of the base to be explored. Ideas such as power generators that could be repaired by the player to open doors, damaged walls to be blown through with explosives, extending catwalks and moving elevators would have been a great addition, but were never implemented. It's possible we could have made them work, but our main focus here was getting a stable and complete fast-paced, satisfying combat experience, something which we were not even sure we could cram into the Scratch program. Now, the rest of our game's story is best experienced firsthand, so I hope you'll go play the game from the link in the description and pinned comment. If you do, let me know what you thought of the environmental design and story elements, and what you'd like to see more or even less of in the sequel. My brother and I love having player feedback, and we don't get enough of it. Overall, my intention with this story was to flesh out and humanize the player character further than had been done in the first game. He is pushed to the limits of his combat knowledge and survival training, all while making life-changing discoveries about his own past. While yes, he is an epic bounty hunter with skills beyond the average human, and an armor suit to get him through intense battles, he's also a person with thoughts and feelings of his own. Hopefully I did a better job humanizing him than the Halo TV show did with their interpretation of Master Chief's, but that's for you to decide. I'd love feedback on the story and characterization of the player if you'll go try out the game. In conclusion, my brother and I intended to design this indie game with elements we knew from experience worked and were fun in other games, like Half-Life and Halo, and iterate upon them with our own creative takes to make a final product that has some of the soul of those previous games, while being its own unique experience rather than a copy of the work of others. Being inspired by Halo, Half-Life, Doom, Metroid, and many other games would not excuse copy and pasting work from those titles, and I do believe Planet Infested stands on its own as being a fun and challenging game to play. Making the game fun and fair was always at the center of our design philosophy. And while Planet Infested is of course a small-scale game in comparison to commercially made projects, it's the biggest project my brother and I have ever worked on, and we're quite happy with how it came out. We also look forward to making even better gameplay experiences in the future. I hope you'll stick with us as we do, and the best way to do that is to subscribe to the channel and like the video. It's free for you and helps us immensely. Not to mention, you'll get notified when new content is uploaded for your viewing enjoyment. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.